So hello guys, welcome back. In today's video we're going to create our first game using Unity. So all the programs we are going to be using in this video, we all be put it down in the description so you can download them. It's completely free, you don't have to do anything. So Unity is free. We're going to be using Unity and Visual Studio Code and some of the plugins that are going to allow us to sync Unity with Visual Studio. So if you already have a little bit understanding of programming or C# programming, any programming language that you know, this will help you to get started. So without further ado, let's get started. So first of all, you just want to go and open up Unity Hub. So of course you will be downloading all of this in the description down below. So open up Unity Hub. So now after Unity Hub is opened up, so go to new, this button. So we're going to create new project. So go create new, and you'll be prompted up on this window. So there are some templates that come with Unity. So there are 2D template and the 3D template. So in today's video we're going to be creating a 3D game. So it will make sense to choose the 3D template. So and you have to put the project name. So our project name, let's just call it my game, just like so. And I have already have this project. So what you want to do is call whatever you want to call your project and just click create, and your project will be created. So now after you open up your project, so you should now be prompted to this window. So you should now be able to start writing your own game. So first we are going to take a look around some windows that Unity already has and see how they are used. So first of all, we have a scene window, and this window is used to, it's what you're going to be using when we're building your game. So it's where you're going to be putting everything that you want to be in your game. So let's say if you need a car in a game, so it should be in here in the scene view. So also there is a game window, which is going to be the preview of what the game is going to be looking like. So this is how the game is going to be looking like. And we have the hierarchy, which is a tiny little window. It's not a tiny little window, but it's only the window which shows all the objects that are in the game. So let's say we have a main camera. So this is the camera which is in a game, and we have a directional light, which is like the sunlight. And also we have the inspector, which shows the properties of the object that you have selected. For example, if I select the camera, you should be having the transform, which specifies the location of the game object. So the main camera has the position, where does this camera located, its rotation and its scale. And there's also components, like you see the camera component. This component is what helps us to render or to show everything that are in a game. So it's the camera component, if you should say. And there is also the project window, which is another window which is going to be used to contain all the assets that we're going to be using in the game. So for example, if we have like textures and images and models and sounds and music, everything, all the things should be in the projects window, and it's where we're going to be creating our scripts and our textures and our models, everything, our materials, all of those stuff are going to be in a project window. It's like where we put everything that we need in the game. So first we're going to start now making our game. So first of all, the game that we're going to be making, it's a very simple game. Remember, it's your first game. We don't want to go higher and going more complex stuff. So we're going to try to make this easier. So we're going to be making a game where there is an AI, there is the gun which is shooting projectile, and you should be trying to shoot it back so that you can avoid the projectile to hit the floor. If they hit the floor, then the game is over. So every time you are shooting the projectile, then that's how you get points. So first, without further ado, let's get started. First of all, let's start by creating a simple word. So let's go into our hierarchy, right click, go to 3D objects, then create a plane. So now it should be creating a simple plane, but we are going to reset its transform. So it's going to have a position of 0, which is going to be on the center of this scene. So right click on the transform, then click reset. So everything will be resetted. So I also need to generate my lighting. So go to light window. This is the window that is going to be responsible of all the lighting stuff. So create new light settings, and it should be creating a new light settings in our asset browser, and just click generate lighting. So save the scene. So they want us to save the scene, so let's call this scene game and hit save. So now our lighting should be starting to be generated. So now we should be able to start making our game. So first of all, let's get used to our controls of how I'm controlling this. So if you right click on your mouse and move the mouse, you should be rotating your camera. If you want to move, use W, A, S, and D while holding the right click mouse button, and just navigate using W, A, S, and D like in the game. And also with what controls we will be using. So if you click W, we should have the move tool, which is like these green, blue, and red arrows, which is going to be used to move objects. So if I click it, so I should be moving the object. And press E, this is the rotate tool. So if you want to rotate an object, so like this, I'm rotating the object. And the scale tool, you just have to click R. So R should be used as a scale tool. So that's the controls, that's the main controls that we will be using. So first we are going to start by creating a simple world. So let's create a cube. Okay, reset is transform, right click, reset. Click F to focus on the selected object, and just let's scale back this plane to be a little bit bigger. So also select your plane, scale it down with R, W, move it up, scale it on the Y axis, and also scale it on the X axis to make it a little bit longer. Okay, now this is our wall, so we should be in here in the middle. So click Ctrl D to duplicate and move it to the other side, so that we have like a hallway inside here. So this is where we're going to be putting our player. Also select the both walls and rotate it on the Y axis. So by clicking, by selecting both of the walls, you can go to transform and make sure the rotation on Y axis is 90 degrees. So now they should be rotating on the forward axis. Okay, let's say, rotate this 90 degrees. Like they should be looking forward, so 90 degrees. So now we have our two walls, and we have to give it a different material so that they have a different look with other objects. So go to your asset window. So go to asset, right click, create a new folder, and call it materials. So this is where we're going to be putting all the materials that we want to use in our game. So right click, create. So now we're going to create a material. So create material. Let's just call this material wall. So this is the wall material, and let's just give it a different color. So something like green, and just assign that material to the wall. So if I drag and drop this, I should be assigning the material. And also drag this material too and drop it into this wall. So we should be having two different walls with the green material. Let's try to push it down so that it is colliding with the floor. So, and also we need to put another wall behind this two walls. So click like one of the walls, Control D to duplicate, and rotate 90 degrees. Go to your transform. Make sure that your Y rotation on this wall is back to 0. So set it to 0 and put your wall back to this, so to make the kind of like a room inside of it. So let's now start by creating our player. So we have our scene. So let's try to scale these two walls so it's nice and easier to see. Okay, now this is the place that we're going to be putting our player. So go to your hierarchy, right click, create an empty object. So this is an empty object that is going to be acting as a player. So go to your transform, reset the transform, and just call it, right click, rename, and call it player, so that we know it's the player character. So add a component. So the component we're going to be adding is a collider. So the collider component helps us to avoid colliding with other objects, so that when the player is moving, it doesn't go through walls. So let's create a Capsule Collider. So we have a Capsule Collider. So let's give it a height of something like 2. And when you focus on your player, just click the player and hit F to focus on the player and move it up. So this is the player now. But at the moment, if you go to the game, you should not be seeing what we have, what we are supposed to see. So it's because our camera is behind these walls. So if you go back into the game window, as you can see, this is what the camera is capturing. So why? It's because it's behind these two walls. So you just need to right click on the you just need to click left click and drag and drop this to be a child of the player. So this camera is now going to be a child of the player. Click the main camera, go to transform, right click, reset transform, and now our camera should be snapped right into the center of our player. So now we have our player. So if you go back to the game, now this is what we should be seeing. So also we just need a rigid body. So a rigid body is like a physics component that helps us to add force to an object. So a rigid body works with colliders, so that if you add force to an object, it doesn't go through walls. So you'll see what I mean in a second. So go to add component and choose rigid body. So this is the component that we will be using to move the player. And also we need a script that we are going to be using to control the player. So go to your assets, right click, create a new folder. So we're going to create a folder that is going to contain all the scripts that we need in our game. So call it scripts and just double click it, right click. We're going to create our first C# script. So this is now the first thing we're going to create. This is the first script that we're going to create, which is going to now be used to control the player. So C# script, and just give it a name. Let's call it player controller. So now this is the script that is going to be used to handle all the inputs. Let's say if you are pressing left arrow or right arrow, we should be moving the player on the x-axis. So we should be moving the player on only one axis. So the player should not be able to move forward or backwards, but he will only be moving right and left. So this is all what we want to use for this player controller. Is going to hold all those functions, all those functionality. And also this is the script that we're going to be using to spawn projectile. Like if you are shooting something, this is the script that is going to handle all of that. So we have created the script, but now it's not yet in the use. So we have to take that script, drag and drop into your player, and let it go, and you should see our player controller being attached to our player. So now we should open this script, but before opening up this script, you should now make sure that you have downloaded Visual Studio Code. The link is down in the description. You can download Visual Studio Code. It's completely free. All the resources that you need to sync Unity with Visual Studio Code are also down in the description. So to register Visual Studio Code with Unity, go to Edit, Preferences. There should be a window called Preferences. Go to External Tools and make sure that your external script editor is set to Visual Studio Code. So if you have already installed this Visual Studio Code, you should now be able to see it under here. I also have Visual Studio 2017, but you can also use Visual Studio 2019. There's also Visual Studio 2022, but it's still in preview. You can use all the external tools that you want, but for me, I've chosen Visual Studio Code because it's quite easily to use it and it's very performant. It's not also laggy. So first of all, this is what you need, and when you open up your script, this will be open up in Visual Studio. So if you double click on this player controller, you should now be starting writing our own code. So now after Visual Studio now is open up, so we should be seeing our player controller script. So when we open up your player controller script, we already have some code written on it. So Unity already writes some basic codes that we should be using to write our own code. So first of all, I'm going to start by explaining all of this. First of all, we have a class called player controller. This class has the same name as the name of the script that we have created, and it also has two functions. There's a void start. This is the function that is going to be called only once the game is started. So this start function will be called once at the first frame of the game when the game starts. There's also another way of calling this start function. This start function can also be called when this game object is created, or if it's instantiated, or if it's spawned. So this is the function that is going to be called, but it's only being called once. And there's also the void update. This function is going to be called every single frame, so it's going to be called multiple times. And let's say your computer is running on like 60 frames per second, so which means that in 1 second we should be calling this void update 60 times. So it is going to be called once per frame. So we should be using this update like to get inputs, so that it is going to be registering all the inputs that we're pressing. So if I press A, it should be moving on the left, and if I press D, it should be moving on the right. So first of all, the way we are going to move our player, we're going to use that rigid body that we have created. So we're going to get the reference to it. So I just need to make it a private. So cause this is going to be private because I don't need this to be accessed outside the class. So rigid, so private rigid body, so call it RB. Okay, just call it rigid body, and when the game starts, we should assign this rigid body to our rigid body. So rigid body, for the moment of speaking, this rigid body is known, so it is not assigned, it's not valid. So equals to get component. So we should be getting the component. This is the function that we use to get the component. So if I go back to Unity, let's click the player. So if I say get component, it will get this rigid body component. That's why it requires us which type of component do we want to get. So in here you should put rigid body and just close that off. That's the only thing you need to get the rigid body. So now we have the rigid body, we should now be able to start using it. So we should be adding force to it, and it should be help us to move left and right. So let's get also to know how to register inputs, because we are going to need input to move this rigid body left to right. So if you go to back to Unity, go to Edit, Project Settings, there's the tiny window. It's not a tiny window, but there is a window called Input Manager, and there is some different, if you expand this axis, there are some different input that are automatically registered by Unity. So there is a horizontal, this is what we are going to be using. This is the horizontal axis that we will be using. It uses left and right key, and it also uses A and W. So if I press A, it should be using -1. This will be outputting a float number. So if I use Alt negative button, so if I press A, it should be outputting -1. If I'm not pressing anything, this should be 0. If I press D, this should be 1. So it goes between -1 and 1. So this is the name that we're going to be using to get this input. As you can see, it's written horizontal. So go back to Visual Studio, create a new float value, let's say float x move. So we called it x move. So input, so this is the class that is responsible of inputs, input dot get axis. So we're going to get the axis of that input and put it horizontal. So this is the name of the input that we want. So whichever values that is going to be passed in here is going to come from our horizontal input, just like we see in here in our project. So if I press D, it's going to be 1. If I press A, it's going to be -1. So if let's see how this is working. So let's write debug. So this is the way of logging and seeing like logging the output of something. So let's say debug.log x move. So this will be outputting our float number in our console window. So let's see in here in our console window, if we hit play, we should be seeing our value. So that x move is going to be outputted. So let's hit play. So now if you see down here, we have a value of 0. If I press A, it should be -1. If I let it go, it should be 0. If I press D, it should be 1. So now after you've seen how this is all working, so we're going to use this x move to add force to our rigid body. So first of all, we need to check if our rigid body is valid. So if rigid body is not equal to null, so if it's valid, let's say rigid body dot add force. This is how we add force. I'm sorry, not explosion, add force. So now we're going to add a new force. So we need a vector 3. So we need to create a new vector 3, which is going to be a vector 3 is actually a vector which contains three float values, x, y, and z. So let's create a vector 3 in here. Vector 3, let's call it force. Okay, let's call it move. Okay, let's call it force, just so, like so, equals to new vector 3. So we're creating a new vector 3, and it needs all those three values, x, y, and z. And as I've already told you, we should only be moving our player on the x-axis, just like this. We should only be moving our player on the x-axis. So other axis should not be applied by force. So by only the x-axis, we should be putting our x move. And then other axis should be 0, like the y-axis should be 0, and the z-axis should be also 0. So close that off. Now we have our vector. So now we have our vector, we can put it in here. So force. So now our rigid body should be using that vector to add force to it. So first of all, I just need the way of controlling how much force we are applying to this rigid body. So let's make a public float. So this float number should be edited in the editor. So float, call it move force. So this is the force that we should be applying on the rigid body. So take that force value and multiply it with our rigid body, our move force, I'm sorry, move force. Also, it should be asking us the force mode we want. So there are plenty of force mode that we can use. So the force mode, just write force mode dot. So we have a way of adding force to the rigid body. by using acceleration, by using the normal force, or using the impulse and velocity change. But so we should be learning all of this is in the next video, but for now we should be using the impulse. We're adding the impulse force to our rigid body. So let's save and go back into the editor and see the changes. So control save, back to Unity. So if you go to your player controller script, you should be having our move force. So let's say it out. So now, because our move force is 0, if we are multiplying with any number multiplied by 0, it's always going to be 0. So we should not applying any force. So to add force, let's set something like 5. That's the amount of force we need to add to the player. So if I press W, A, as you can see, our player is falling. It's just because our rigid body is not being constrained to freeze the rotation. So we should not be rotating anyway. So go to your rigid body, go to constraints, make sure that we are freezing the rotation. So we're freezing the rotation on the both x-axis, on the y-axis and on the z-axis, because we don't want to rotate anywhere. So hit play, and if I press A, D, so our player should be moving left and right. So also we just need to add a drag to this, so that when I press A and back to D, it will quickly move back to 1. So let's set the drag to 1, play again. So now we should be moving, and also let's decrease our move force because it's a bit higher. So let's set something like 2, hit play again. So now we should be moving on the both axes. Okay, let's set it to something like 1, and just like so, or 0.5. So this is a float number, you can't be in decimals. So now we can move left and right. So another thing we're going to add, we want the player to be looking forward. Okay, so we want the player to shoot projectiles. Like when I press left click on the mouse, it should be shooting the projectiles from our camera. So first we're going to create our projectile prefab. So a prefab is an object which exists here in the project, and it's going to be instantiated by the player. So in just a second you will be getting what I'm saying. So if I go to my hierarchy, right click, create new object. So let's create a sphere. So this sphere is going to be our, like, let's say our bullet. So go to transform, reset our transform back to 0. So double click on the sphere to focus on it. So let's scale it down. So again, this should be our bullet projectile. So click F to focus on it. So you should be now be using like a lot of shortcuts. So if you don't know the shortcuts, go to edit, shortcuts. Unity already has a lot of shortcuts. You can see it in here. So if you don't know the shortcuts I'm using, they are all listed out here. So also I'm going to set a material to this projectile bullet. So let's just call it bullet. Okay, let's go into player, bullet. Just let's create a new material. Right click, create material. Let's call it bullet mat. So bullet material. Let's set the albedo, like our color, to something like gray color. So take that material, assign it to our bullet sphere, and just go to assets, right click, create a new folder. So we're going to create a new folder that is going to hold this player bullet. So call it prefab. So a prefab is going to be our player bullet. So just drag your player bullet into the prefab folder, and just like that we have a bullet prefab. So even if I delete this player bullet, I should be taking that prefab and drag and drop into the scene as many as I want. So this is the use of prefabs. So it's like the copies of the object that you have created. So just like so, we want to spawn this bullet when the player clicks left click. So go back to your Visual Studio. Let's go down here. So let's create a public game object. A game object is an object that exists in the world in Unity. So game object, call it bullet. So bullet. Let's call it let's call it bullet prefab. So now when the player clicks the left click mouse, we should be spawning this. So let's go down here. So if input, so we just need to get the input from the player. If input dot get button down, okay, let's get input dot get key code, input dot get key down. So if we write input dot get key down, this will only be called once the key is pressed. So let's so it needs us to specify the key that we want to register this. So let's say key code dot mouse 0. Mouse 0 is the left click of the mouse. So if this one is pressed, this is going to be true. So if this one is pressed, we want to spawn our bullet prefab. So let's get a reference to our bullet prefab by creating game object obj equals to instantiate. So this is the function that we use to spawn a game object, and it also needs us to specify which object are we spawning. So it's the bullet prefab that we have created. So the position where we want to spawn this bullet from is our camera's position. So the way we get our camera, so as you already know, we have a camera here. If you go to player, under player we have a main camera. So this is the position. This position is what we are going to be using to spawn our projectile. But as you can see, the position of this main camera is a 0 vector. So on the x, on the both x, y and z, it's all zeroed out. So to make sure that we're getting the world position, so this is the relative position of this main camera based on its parent object. So we need to get the position of this main camera from the world. So first we go back to Visual Studio, and also make sure that your main camera is tagged as main camera, because we are going to be using this to get our camera. So if we type camera, this is the class that is responsible for camera.main. So the camera.main will get the camera that is the first camera, which is tagged as main camera. That's why I told you have to make sure that your camera is tagged as main camera. It will automatically be tagged as main camera, but if not so, you should be adding that tag. So camera.main dot, so now we are getting our camera.transform. The transform is a struct which contains both the position, the rotation, and the scale, but we only need the position. So that's why we need to get dot position. So now we get the position of the camera. And there's a Quaternion rotation. The Quaternion are like the vectors that used to clone the original and returns the clone of the object. So this is basically the rotation of an object. So the Quaternion are a little bit advanced and they are harder, and I'm still learning. So just to make sure that our object is not rotating, because our bullets are spheres, so who cares the rotation of the sphere? Okay, however you can rotate your sphere, it will always be looking the same. So that's why we're going to be using a 0 rotation. So Quaternion, write Quaternion dot identity. So this is a 0 rotation, and just close it like so. So if I save, now we should be spawning our projectiles. Go back to Unity. So click player. We should be having our bullet prefab. Just drag your player prefab from the project window and drag and drop it to our prefab, our bullet prefab. So if I hit play and I click it, So as you can see in the hierarchy, there's a bullet prefab, but it's colliding with our player, so we need to make sure that this is not colliding. So go select our player bullet, make sure that our sphere collider is triggered. So if it's triggered, it's not going to be colliding, but it's going to get the information about what we are triggering with. So check is triggered and hit play, and if I click, right click, you should be seeing our bullet. So let's first, so at the moment you can't see the bullet, but if I click, there are a bullet being spawned, but we can't see them. But if you go to the scene window, you can see 2 bullets being spawned. So first of all, the moment we spawn this bullet, we just need to add force to it. So that's why we need also a rigid body to our player bullet. So select your prefab, go to your inspector, add a component, search for rigid body, and now we should be able to start adding force to this bullet. So first, go back to your to Unity. I'm sorry, go back to Visual Studio. So we are going to add the force to this obj object that we are spawning. So let's say, so okay, obj dot get component. So we're getting the component from the obj, this obj game object that we have spawned. So the type of component we want to get is the rigid body. Then we should click dot add force. So we are going to add force, as at the time we are spawning this, we should be adding an impulse to this bullet. So we need a vector force that we're adding. So create also another vector, just as how we did on our movement. Call it move equals to new vector 3. So we created, there are vector 3, vector 2. Vector 2 has 2 float numbers, x and y, and the vector 3 has it's like a 3 vector. Okay, we need an x-axis. So but first of all, the way we are going to add force to this bullet is kind of different. So get rid of that vector that we have added, go to our add force. So the way we're going to add the force, we're going to get the direction of our, so again, the force, the vector force that we're adding is going to be containing, has to contain the magnitude in the direction. So the direction, we're going to take the direction and multiply it with the magnitude. If we multiply it with the magnitude, we should be getting the vector force. First of all, let's get the direction. The direction of where we're going to add our force, we're going to get our camera dot main. So this is the camera we're getting, and we're getting the forward vector of the camera. That's the direction. If you heard about vectors, they are direction, they has direction and magnitude. So it's like the velocity, right? The velocity has direction and magnitude. So you just need to get the camera dot main dot transform dot forward. So that will give you the forward vector, the forward direction, and multiply it with the magnitude. The magnitude is a float number, which is going to be the amount of force we should be adding to our projectile. So let's go up here to make a float number that we should be using to control our force. So public float, a float is a decimal number, right? So public float, and call it bullet force. Oh, I'm sorry, bullet force. So now we're going to take that bullet force and multiply it with our direction. So multiply it with bullet force. So we need to add a force mode. Which force mode are we using to add a force to a bullet? So it's force mode dot impulse. So this is, we're adding the impulse to our projectile, our bullet. So now if I hit save, go back to Unity, so if I select my player and go to bullet force, we should be now adding force to our bullets. So let's set it to something like 10. So if I hit play, so as you can see, if I click, I'm shooting bullets. As you can see, I'm shooting bullets, but as you can see in my hierarchy, there are objects that are being spawned. So but they never they just keep going and they never get destroyed. So that's why I need to destroy it after a given period of time. So let's get to destroy this. Destroy. This will require us the object that we want to destroy. So it's the obj, the object that we have spawned, and it requires the option amount of time to delay before destroying the object. So let's destroy this object after 2 seconds. Save the I'm sorry. Okay, let's save, go back to Unity. So if I hit play and if I click, as you can see, after 2 seconds, now our bullet is destroyed. If I click this, watch on the hierarchy, now boom, it's being destroyed after 2 seconds. So now we should be good to start coding our stuff. Okay, now let's go back to Visual Studio. So now before going further, this is the only thing we need to spawn bullets, but as you can see, if I hit play, the bullets are not having enough force. So let's set the bullet force to something like 15 to add a little bit more force. So now as you can see, the bullet now has enough force to be spawned. So first I just need to create our AI bullet. So our AI bullet should be standing right here, and it should also be shooting bullets right facing to the player. So what you have to do is to try not to get that bullets down on the ground. So go to your hierarchy, right click, create a new cube. So this is going to be like the spawning point. So go to transform, reset your transform, push it back in here. So let's scale it down, just R, scale it down, E to rotate on the x-axis, and R to rotate on the y-axis. So just it's facing that way, so it should be shooting bullets just like that, so facing to the player. So let's give it a different material. Let's create material and call it gun material. So this is this gun material. Let's make it something, let's give it a red color, just like so, and assign that material to our cube. So now we should be having our gun, which is going to be shooting bullets. So go back to your script. You are going to create another script which is going to be responsible of shooting these AI bullets. So this will be shooting every 2 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, every 2 seconds we are going to shoot a projectile. So right click to your script, create new C# script. Let's call it AI shooter, just like so. So take that AI shooter script and assign it to our cube. So now we should be having our AI shooter. So double click it to open up in your code. Go to Visual Studio. So now we have our AI shooter script. So what we have to do in an update function, in an update function we should be calling a shoot bullet function every 2 seconds. So first of all, let's get a reference to our game object, to our bullet. So public game object, just as how we have done before, call it bullet prefab, and just in update function. Okay, let's also have a boolean called, a boolean is a variable that returns true or false. So bool, let's go it has spawned. It's going, by default it's going to be false, because by default when we start the game this has spawned is going to be false. And also in an update function, what we want to do is we want to, first of all, we just need to create a function that is going to be handling all the waiting stuff. So you will just see what I mean in a second. So if I just write, if I'm going to create a function iEnumerator, this is the function that we are going to be calling every 2 seconds. So don't get worried about the iEnumerator stuff. So what basically this do is waits for a certain amount of time and it runs the code after that period of time. So let's see what it does. So iEnumerator, let's say shoot, let's call it shoot, and go down here, just see what I write. So yield return new wait for seconds. So this will run, and after this given period of time. So as they can see, we have a float seconds, so 2 seconds, so just write it 2. And if you go down here, this anything that you write down here will be called after 2 seconds. That's when we're going to be spawning our projectile. So if I say game object obj, so we're going to get the reference to our spawned bullet. So instantiate, just as how we learned how to spawn bullet. So bullet prefab, so we're going to instantiate the bullet prefab. From what position? So it's transform, which is our position of where this AI shooter is attached on. Transform.position. The quaternion should be a 0 rotation, so dot identity. So now this is how we spawn bullets. So we also need to get our rigid body to our bullets. So if I should add force to our bullets, so obj dot add, dot get component. Let's get our rigid body component. So rigid body dot add force. The force we are going to add is going to also be again the direction multiplied with the magnitude. So the direction of this is going to be the up vector. Why are we getting the up vector? Is because the up vector of this object, so as you can see where the AI shooter is this y-axis. So it should be shooting in the direction of this y arrow, so which is the up vector. So that's why we need transform dot up. That's the direction. Multiply it with something like the force, the bullet force. So let's create a float number, public float called bullet force, and take that transform dot up, multiply it with bullet force, and also the force mode dot impulse. And also we should be destroying this after 2 seconds, if you should say. So now because this is going to be called after 2 seconds, there is no reason of destroying this. So if I say destroy obj, and I also write and I also give it the amount of time to delay before destroying this object. So now if it will be like 4 seconds. So if you wait for 2 seconds and destroy this one and also wait for another 2 seconds, that should be 4 seconds. So we only need 2 seconds. That's why we don't need to put any other thing else. So now we are now ready to start calling our function. So this all stuff that are beneath this function, this line of code, are going to be called after this amount of period of time. So go to our update. Again, this is the function that is going to be called every frame. So if we have not spawned it, okay, I know this can confuse you, but if has spawned is equals to false. If you have not spawned, we should spawn it. So we should call this function. So how we call the iEnumerator function just type in start coroutine. That's how we call the iEnumerator function, and specify the iEnumerator function, so that's shoot, and just close that off, and we're calling this function. And set has spawned back to true, so because we're going to set this to has spawned so that it doesn't get to call this every time. And after 2 seconds, this object is destroyed. Before destroying this, we want to set our has spawned back to false, so that we give the opportunity to spawn another bullet. So has spawned equals to false, so that we can call this again. So if I hit save, go back to the editor, so now if you see down here, we should be seeing our bullet prefab. So go to our prefab, just click your player bullet, duplicate it, and just rename it to let's say gun bullet. So this is the bullet that is going to be shooted by this this gun. So let's give it a different material. So right click, create material. Okay, let's just give it the same color as our gun material. So go to prefab, select our player bullet, and if you go to our render mesh, there is a material that we are using for this sphere. So if you click this arrow, so you should now be able to select which material you want for this bullet. So select that red material, and now our bullet should be red. So if I spawn the NAI bullet and the player bullet, as you can see, they are different. So you should now be able to differentiate what our player bullet is. So select our gun bullet. So make sure that our bullet prefab is set to our gun bullet, and the bullet force, the amount of force that we have to add to our gun, is going to be like the same as our bullet force, which is used by the player. So we should also need to be using 15 as the amount of force to add to a bullet. So hit play. So now as you can see, our bullets are not being spawned. So let's see what the problem is. Okay, let's try to put this up here. Okay, I'm sorry. So has spawned equals to true. Save. Go back to Unity. Okay, what's happening? So let's see why this is not spawning the bullets. I've seen where the problem is. So we have messed this up. So copy these two lines. So at the time we are spawning this, we should be spawning our bullets. So let's see. So destroy that, copy that line and paste it into our if statement here. So this is going to be called when this after this has spawned is true, after this has spawned is false, and we're going to automatically spawn this, and we just need to pass in the game object that we want. So let's say this should let's give it a parameters called game object called obj, which is going to be the object that is going to be spawned, and go to our shoot function. Make sure that the obj function is in this function, so put in obj. So now everything should be good. So save, go back to Unity. So if you hit play, now our AI bullet are being shooted from that. As you can see, it's shooting bullets, but it's way up higher. So we just need to change our rotation so that it's facing the player. Oh, we just need to decrease our force, bullet force, because it's adding a lot of force. So let's set the bullet force to something like 5 and hit play. So that's way lower. So put it something like 10. Hit play. As you can see, now our bullets are being shooted from that gun bullet. So let's change again the rotation of this bullet so it's nicely facing the player. Hit play again. So as you can see, now it's shooting the player. So now you should be able to start shooting your projectiles too. So let's change the rotation of the player so that the camera, so if you select the camera, so that the camera should be looking slightly up. So click okay, press E and just rotate it on the x-axis and hit play, so that when the bullets are shooting from that AI bullet, so we should be now able to shoot back to this one. So first we're going to apply that logic. So when our bullets hits with our gun bullets, so they destroy each other. So that's how you get points. So if I go to my Visual Studio, I'm sorry, so I just need to also create my bullet script, which is going to sit on our AI bullets. No, I'm sorry, for our bullets, so for our player bullets. So this is the script that we're going to be adding to the bullet. So when the bullet is triggered with our the gun bullets, so it should be destroying that gun bullet. So that's how we will be getting points. So if you go to right click, create a new C# script and call it bullet, just like so. So go to prefabs, make sure that the player bullet has that script. So add component, search for bullet. Okay, bullet. So that's the script that we have created. So double click it to open up in Visual Studio. So now let's get rid of all of this stuff because we are not going to use this. The only thing we need to use is the function that is going to be called once we triggered with an object. First, let's create it. So public void on trigger. So this is case sensitive, you have to write it as the way it's written. So on trigger enter, so on trigger enter, just how I wrote this, and put it a parameter called collider, and call it other. So now you should be now able to start writing okay, this function will be called once this bullet is triggered. And you also need to make sure that your sphere collider is set to is trigger. And also go to prefab and make sure that the gun bullet has a tag. So we just need to add a tag. I already have the AI bullet tag, but if you don't have it, go to add tag, hit this plus icon and give it a name, AI bullet. So but because I already have it, so I'm good to go. And go back to, after adding your AI bullet, go back to your gun bullet, make sure that you're setting the tag to be AI bullet. So this tag is what we're going to be using to check what object we have triggered with. So go back to your Visual Studio. So this will give you the collider that we have triggered with. So first, if other, which is this collider, if other the tag, so if the tag of the collider that we have collided is equal, now we have to put the AI tag that we have said, the AI bullet. So now we should be able to say that we should now be able to confirm that we have collided with the AI bullet of that gun. So what we need to do is, let's debug something. So debug, just to make sure that this is working, debug.log, let's say we hit something, and just save, go back to Unity, so let's hit play. So if you focus down here, if we hit something, if we hit this bullet, it should be saying we hit something. So let's try to hit this bullet. Okay, now as you can see, we have hit that bullet, and just like so, we hit something have already been logged out in here. So there are plenty of times, like 1 2 3 4 5. We have hit this object 5 times. So what we need to also do, it's kind of weird, but we also need to rotate this nicely to make sure that this game is working fine, so that it's facing the player. Well, it seems to be so hard. So if I hit play, so now our bullets should be shooting right from, okay, but that's okay. Let's rotate it up a bit, just a tiny bit. Okay, let's rotate it up again so it's nicely easy to see. Okay, now I can be able to shoot these bullets, so I can move right, left and right. And if I go back to Visual Studio, now instead of outputting this log, we should be destroying that object that we have collided with. So that's why we need to write destroy. So it requires us the object that we need to destroy is other, which is the object that we have collided with, dot game object. So that's the object that we are going to destroy. So if I hit save, go back to Unity, so if I hit play, so now if I collide with that bullet, now it should be destroyed. Okay, now if it hits the ground, we should be outputting something like game over. So let's select the ground and give it a tag. So first go to add tag, add another tag called this ground. So this is the tag that is going to be used to check the ground. So if I select my ground, I should tag this as ground. So let's say, okay, let's take that gun bullet, assign our script bullet to it. So drag and drop your bullet script to our gun bullet, so an AI bullet. So double click it also. So let's say else, so if this is not true, else if other, so if other dot tag is equals to okay, let's see, okay, let's say we just need to also create another script. So this script is for our player bullet, so we just need to create also the script for AI bullet. So create C# script, call it AI bullet. So now this is going to be sitting on our AI bullet prefab. So go to prefab, select our gun bullet, get rid of that script that we have already added, because this bullet is for our player. Remove it, and we just need to add its own script. So go to script, add an AI bullet to it. So add an AI bullet, double click it to open up in Visual Studio. Also get rid of this tool function because we're not going to be using it. So let's all add the same thing as what we have added in our player bullet. So void, okay, public void on trigger enter. So if you don't type this as how I'm typing, so this is very case sensitive. So if you even miss a capital letter or a small letter, this will not be called. So give it a parameter of collider. So collider, call it other. So now as we have done before, so if other, so if other dot tag, if the tag that the AI bullet, if the collider that the AI bullet collides with the ground, so that's when we should be outputting that the game is over. So if other dot tag is equals to our ground, So if the AI bullet hits the ground, let's debug that the game is over. So debug.log game over. So let's save. So if I hit play, okay, now if as you can see, the bullet has hit the ground and the game is over. So what we need to do is to make sure that we're stopping the AI from shooting once the game is over. So once the game is over, so we should not be shooting any more bullets. So let's make a boolean. So bool game, okay, game is over. So it's going to be starting by equals to false, because the game is over will always be when the game starts. The game is over. The game is not over, I'm sorry. So when the game starts, go to here. When the game starts, game is over equals to false. So we should be saying game is over when the game starts, back to false. So that we need to be able to start to continue shooting other bullets. So if I go to our update and make an if statement, so if game is over is equals to true, okay, if game over is equals to true, return. What this will do, everything that is beneath this return, everything that is down here should be not running. So we should stop running this all of these scripts. So we should not be able to start spawning other bullets. So we should stop shooting bullets indeed. So go to your bullet. I'm sorry, why did I close that? I have no idea. So open up again our bullet. Instead of debugging game over, let's tell the AI bullet to stop shooting bullets. So we need the way to get this AI bullet stuff. So first of all, this game object, okay, I'm sorry, go down here. So game object dot find object with tag. Let's see if our okay, I'm sorry, okay, find object, okay, game object dot find. This we find the object with a specific name. We are finding a bullet called, we are finding this object, so this AI bullet or AI gun. So let's rename our bullet to be AI gun. So call it AI gun. And if we go to our Visual Studio and game object dot find AI gun, okay, so now we're getting our gun component. We're getting our gun game object dot get component. We're getting the component of AI shooter class, AI shooter. So which is this this script that we're getting. So we need to make sure that game is over is equals to false. I'm sorry, is equals to true, but this one is private, so it can't get used to, we can't reference it outside the class. So we need to make sure that this boolean is public. So public bool game is over, so that we can access it outside the class. So dot game is over equals to true. So now we should be stop shooting more bullets. So save all those two scripts, go back to Unity. So if I hit play and the bullet hits the ground, so now there should not be any more bullet that we should be shooting. So let's hit play. So if I shoot this one, okay, this gun we should be shooting other bullets, and if one hits the ground, now the game over screen will be prompted. So in just a minute I'm going to show you how to create a game over screen. So let's let it go down. So now the game over, so it can't shoot any more bullets. So let's create a screen for the game over. So right click UI, create an image. Okay, I'm sorry, delete that, go again, right click UI, create a panel, double click it to face the canvas. Make sure that you're in 2D view, and we're going to create a game over screen. So right click on your canvas, go to UI, create a new text. So this is the text that we're going to be using to show the game over. So make sure the alignment is centered and is in the middle, and let's increase the font size. Make sure that we have the best fit, so we should be now. So if you click Alt and if you click and press Alt, you should be able to scale this up. Okay, let's disable that best fit and add a font size, and just as a text you need to set it as game over. So when the game starts, this should be disabled. So if I go here, you should be seeing that our game over is enabled. So I need to change the color of my panel to be something like black. And make sure that our text is let's set the color to be something like white, which says game over. So by default, when we start the game, this canvas, this game over canvas should be disabled. So let's click this checkbox to disable our game over screen. So what we need to do after our game is over, let's go to AI bullet. I'm sorry. Okay, when the game is over, we need to enable our game over screen. So let's go here, create our reference to our canvas. So public game object, let's say game over screen. So now if the game is over, we should be enabling that game over screen. So game over screen dot enabled, so dot set active, I'm sorry, equals to true. So now we should be setting active, we should be activating that game over screen. So set active to true, we enable that checkbox that we have disabled. So if we click our AI gun, so we should be having a game over screen slat. So drag and drop that canvas into our game over screen slat and hit play. So now if one bullet hits the ground, that game over screen will be set to active. So let's let it go, and boom, game over. So that's the only thing we had to say for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any suggestion if we should be continuing making game videos, so let me know in the comments. So thank you guys for watching. See you guys in the next video.